the Chinese war fleet ambushed America's largest offshore oil rig, but paid a heavy price. On the 12th of September 2025, in the tense darkness of the South China Sea, Beijing launched a bold attack that should never have happened. It was a night when the ocean itself seemed to hold its breath, when the horizon blurred with shadows of steel, and when silence was shattered by fire. The target was the United States Freedom Rig, an offshore platform standing 400 feet tall, weighing over 120,000 tons, a floating city of iron and energy. This platform wasn't just an engineering marvel, it was a lifeline. It fueled US allies across Asia, pumped millions of barrels of crude, and represented America's grip on the Indo-Pacific energy chain. Guarded by a forward-deployed Marine unit just a few miles away, the rig was more than steel. It was a symbol of presence, of deterrence, of dominance. So how did the United States fight back when all electronic signals were completely cut off? How were missiles stopped when radar was disabled? These were the questions that would echo long after the smoke cleared. And tonight, I'll reveal the truth right now. From the horizon, the first dark outlines appeared. A Chinese aircraft carrier, weighing 65,000 tons, broke the surface mist like a looming fortress. Around it, 6 Type 052D destroyers slid across the waves, their silhouettes sharp under the starlight. 4 sleek frigates flanked them, advancing in formation like wolves encircling prey. Their arsenal was staggering. 10 long-range cruise missiles locked in place. 5 electronic warfare aircraft, waiting for the signal to ignite the electromagnetic spectrum. And 10 bombers circling, loaded with more than 40,000 pounds of ordnance, enough firepower to erase an entire city from the map. In theory, it was flawless. A perfect ambush. China's plan was ruthless in its simplicity. Blind American radar, with 120 gigawatts of jamming power, disable defense systems before they could blink, and humiliate Washington by annihilating their strategic energy hub. The message to the world would be unmistakable. The South China Sea belongs to Beijing. But history has always punished arrogance. And on this night, hubris would prove fatal. At exactly 3:15 in the morning local time, the calm waters were broken. The People's Liberation Army Navy deployed its strike group like predators stalking prey. Their formation was tight, deliberate, and menacing. The destination was chillingly clear: the Freedom Rig. At 3:27, the first phase began. 10 cruise missiles streaked into the night sky like fiery comets, their tails glowing red across the black canvas above the sea. Behind them roared 5 Y-9 electronic warfare aircraft. Their jamming beams unleashed invisible storms, pumping 120 gigawatts of distortion into the ether, blinding American radar arrays that had been designed to see everything. And then came the heavy blow. 10 JH-7 bombers thundered at low altitude, hugging the water to avoid detection. Each carried 4,000 pounds of ordnance. Together, they were the hammer that would finish the job. Nearly $500 million worth of missiles, bombs, and electronic chaos were unleashed upon a single target. Beijing's message was brutal. The South China Sea belongs to China. Yet arrogance writes its own epitaph. Inside the American outpost, a very different story was unfolding. While Chinese commanders imagined victory, US Marines were preparing to fight blind. With every missile launched, a countermeasure was waiting. With every aircraft overhead, a rifleman's eyes tracked the skies. If technology failed, human instinct would take its place. At 3:29 in the morning, the unthinkable happened. The advanced ASPI-6 radar arrays guarding the rig flickered once, then went black. For 5 long seconds, the base was blind. China's jammers had done their job, or so Beijing thought. Inside the American command post, red emergency lights snapped on, alarms wailed, and screens froze in static. To most, this would mean panic, but not here. Colonel James Marin, a battle-hardened veteran with 2 decades of deployments, slammed his hand on the table and gave a single order. Switch to manual. Fight by hand. Forward observation teams sprinted to rooftop positions. They carried thermal scopes and laser rangefinders, tools worth only a few $1,000s compared to China's multi-million-dollar jamming gear. Anti-air batteries, stripped of radar guidance, now relied on human eyes and instincts sharpened by training. At 3:32, the first missile came screaming in at nearly 550 mph. Private Sanchez, just 22 years old and barely out of training, spotted its glowing trail. He shouted its trajectory, and seconds later, a Stinger missile leapt into the night. A direct hit. The Chinese missile exploded in a blinding fireball above the sea. Wave after wave came. By 3:36, 9 out of 10 cruise missiles had been intercepted, ripped apart in the sky. 7 of 10 bombers were reduced to flaming wreckage, crashing into the dark sea below. The defenders had achieved the impossible, a near 90% intercept rate without radar. But victory came at a cost. One missile detonated just 300 yards from the rig's perimeter. The shockwave tore through defenses. Windows shattered. 5 Marines were injured. 2 were burned. 3 left with ruptured eardrums. One sergeant would never hear again from his right ear, a living scar of how close the rig came to annihilation. China had fired $500 million worth of steel and fire, and all they achieved was failure. But Washington was not relieved. It was enraged. Retaliation was no longer a question. It was a promise. By 3:45, American cyber teams were already dissecting fragments of missiles and pulses of jamming. Satellites, P-8 Poseidon patrol aircraft, and underwater sonar all traced the attack back to its source, a Chinese strike group, 80 nautical miles away. Their combined firepower exceeded $4.2 billion in assets. On their decks, 40 J-15 fighters stood ready for a second strike. Beijing believed humiliation of Washington would cement dominance. But in Washington, phones lit up. Secure lines rang in the Pentagon. By 4:02, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs briefed the president. The words were chilling. "We've confirmed it. The attack came from the Chinese fleet." The response was immediate. Submarines lurking in the Philippine Trench moved into firing positions. EA-18G Growlers armed with advanced jamming modules launched from Guam. Ballistic missiles in Pacific silos were placed on 5-minute standby. This was no longer a skirmish. This was open war. At 4:28, the ocean erupted. From 200 feet below, the USS Louisiana and USS Ohio launched 20 Tomahawk cruise missiles. Skimming across the water at 550 mph, they cut straight toward the Chinese fleet. Simultaneously, EA-18Gs from Guam filled the sky with electronic chaos. Drones, switchblades, and Phoenix Ghosts rose like a living swarm, armed with armor-piercing charges. At 4:36, the first strike hit. Drones slammed into destroyer radar domes and CIWS turrets. Within 3 minutes, one destroyer was engulfed in fire, its ammunition detonating with the force of 200 tons of TNT. Moments later, ATACMS missiles from the Philippines struck. One frigate was split in half, its survivors cast into a sea of burning oil. Tomahawks followed. Of the 20 launched, 8 broke through. 4 tore into the Shandong carrier, ripping open its flight deck and igniting 60,000 gallons of jet fuel. Within minutes, Beijing's pride was ailing. Just here, by 5:10, the once formidable Dragon fleet was chaos. Destroyers crippled, frigates sinking, the Shandong burning like a torch in the night. By 5:18, the final wave arrived. 10 Tomahawks from USS Missouri, 4 got through. 1 obliterated a frigate, 2 shredded the carrier's command tower, and 1 detonated in its ammunition stores. A fireball, 600 feet high, lit the dawn sky, seen 80 miles away. The casualty count soared. More than 200 Chinese sailors dead, 2,000 wounded or missing, $7 billion in naval assets gone. America had not only survived the ambush, it had turned the night into China's nightmare. By dawn, the South China Sea was no longer a chessboard of threats. It was a graveyard of burning steel. Oil slicks stretched for miles. The Dragon fleet was shattered. For Beijing, the gamble ended in humiliation. For Washington, it was proof. Proof that even under electronic blackout, America could fight blind and still win. Proof that training, resilience, and willpower could triumph over numbers and arrogance. The Pentagon's statement was clear. The United States does not start wars, but when attacked, we will end them. The balance of power had shifted, permanently, yet even in victory, questions lingered. Was this the end of China's ambitions? Or was it only the beginning of a storm yet to come? In the ashes of the South China Sea, both nations stood at the edge of escalation. For the Marines on the rig, scars remained. For Beijing, the wound was deeper. National pride burned in full view of the world. For America, the message was unmistakable. Deterrence still held, but the price of peace was eternal vigilance. As dawn rose, the wreckage floated in silence, a reminder to every adversary: America may bend, but it will not break.